a devoted fan, and a plugged-in reporter. There is no better way to talk about hoops than that. Mia O'Brien and Mitch Northam have you covered for the W, the NCAA, Unrivaled, and anything else that involves a ball and a backboard. This is the Women's Basketball Podcast.
What's going on, party people? Happy March. It's been a hot minute since we last joined you from the home studios of the Women's Basketball Podcast, your one-stop shop for all things college hoops, WNBA, and oh so much more. Mia O'Brien, I am the aforementioned devoted fan, also a journalist as well, and of course joined by the plugged-in reporter when it comes to all things women's hoops, Mitch Northam of USA Today. We appreciate those of you who came out and joined us live last week at Longleaf Swine for our live show with the boys of Ovius and Giglio. Had a good time. Mitch and I finally met in person. I want to make sure we get that
we did
in the pod right off the top, because how many people have asked you, Mitch, throughout the course of the tournament so far, hey, you and me, a great chemistry, and your response has been what?
That we never met in person. We did meet in person last week, which was awesome. And OG Bracket Night was awesome. Had a lot of fun out there. Good barbecue, good beer, good people. We got some picks and brackets. I've already gotten some picks wrong, so that's been fun. This is March. We sleep in May.
Let's dive right into it because we do have a lot to get to. First things first, we are going to do a starting five. You will see the first three of the starting five kind of reflecting upon the opening week of the women's basketball tournaments. The next two in the starting five, looking ahead to the Sweet 16, the Elite Eight. But before we get to that, I do want to wish Mitch a happy birthday, since we are recording on Tuesday, March 24th. And so a happy birthday to Mitch. We're recording on Tuesday morning of Mitch's birthday, right after the round of 32 games wrapped up late on Mitch's birthday eve. And I also want to make sure we run through the slate of Sweet 16 games, because the field, Mitch, the schedule, it is set. So let's get that out of the way. Then we're going to look back at the weekend that was. The game that will start us off on Friday, Notre Dame, Vanderbilt. That is in Region 1, so that will take place in Fort Worth, a 2:30 tip-off. North Carolina and UConn at 5 p.m. on Friday. Minnesota, UCLA, that is the 7:30. Duke, LSU is the nightcap. And then on Saturday, Sweet 16, Day 2, Louisville and Michigan get us going at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Kentucky and Texas, followed by Oklahoma and South Carolina, the rematch. And then TCU and number one in this week's starting five, the Cinderella that we did not know we needed, the Virginia Cavaliers. And so let's get right to it. We're not going to bury the lead. Final score from Iowa City, Carver Hawkeye Arena, which was not 90 degrees courtside like it was in the opening round of the tournament. It actually was 29 degrees there yesterday morning, was 40 some odd degrees at game time. Final score in double OT, the Who's prevail 83-75 over the two-seeded Hawkeyes. I'm going to step back. You know I have thoughts on the team that I do root for, and not just this performance from Jan Jensen's Hawks, but also what we saw when they were nearly upset by 15th seeded Fairleigh Dickinson on Saturday. But let's just start with this, Mitch. Is this result more indicative of Iowa and where they are headed, or what Virginia has been able to do, winning 3 games in 5 days?
For me, the story is about Virginia. If you listen to this program, you have heard me talk about how Amaka Ogwumike-Hamilton, Coach Mox, was going to be entering a contract year next year. And it was very crucial for her to make the NCAA tournament this year. And so not only has Virginia done that, but they are now the first team to advance to the Sweet 16 out of the first 4 in the women's tournament since we expanded to a first 4, 68 teams in 2022. So it's history in the making for Virginia. It's a return to, some prominence for Virginia. This is a team that we will talk about one of these players who was on these teams back in the day, but in the early 90s, they were going to Final Fours a whole lot. And
we're going to talk about two players who were on those Final Four teams because the head coach at South Carolina was also on those teams.
Oh, sure. We'll talk about her too. Yeah, she's important, I guess. So this was a really like signature program in the ACC under Debbie Ryan. They kind of fell back a little ways under Joanne Boyle and then just went into the absolute tank under Tina Thompson. And I think it was disappointing just for a lot of like longtime basketball fans to see what that program had turned into under Tina Thompson. And you've seen kind of this slow climb back to the top for Coach Mox, and she's rallied investment around that program again. She's rallied fan support around that program again. We were just waiting on the big wins to happen, and we finally got them. So, now, not only do you get your first 4 victory over a good Arizona State team, then you upset a Georgia team in the first round, then you upset Iowa on their home floor in the second round. So 2 overtime wins, our cardiac Cavaliers, the Wahoos, dancing into the Sweet 16 for the first time since 2000. Also, I said this yesterday, this Virginia team lost to UMBC at home in the regular season. Nothing good can happen to a Virginia basketball team until you lose to UMBC, apparently.
Who would have thought? And now, of course, Ryan Odom, once upon a time the coach on the men's side of UMBC, is now the head coach at Virginia. So maybe we just needed that full circle moment for the entire University of Virginia, which also made the ACC title game in football to finally get things back on the track when it comes to athletics. All right. So Mitch believes that this result is more indicative of Virginia. Of course, my timeline flooded with hot takes about Jan Jensen, a coach who literally 2 weeks ago, we sat here recording this podcast, roll the tape, folks, and we said that Jan Jensen should be in the conversation for National Coach of the Year, despite Iowa getting boat raced by UCLA in the Big Ten championship game. And you could make the argument, yes, their last 3 times, including that Big Ten title game against the Bruins, and then that round 1 game against Fairleigh Dickinson, which was as a nail biter as you will see between a 2 and a 15 seed in the women's or the men's tournament. And then the results that we saw Monday afternoon at Carver Hawkeye Arena. Independent of that, I would still say that Jan should finish in the top 10 of voting of best coach of the year in women's basketball. And that's not biased. That's just the reality of she had one of the youngest teams in the country. She reiterated that to me last Sunday on the ESPN Women's Bracketology Reaction Show, because she said, we have the 4 seniors, 3 of which play, and one of those remaining 3, Taylor McCabe, has been done for the year for over a month now with a torn ACL. And so it's Kylie Feuerbach, it's Hannah Stolke. They have 0 juniors who play. And this is a sophomore and freshman laden team, which is why for diehards of Iowa, it's a callback to Caitlin Clark's sophomore year, in which they were ousted at Carver Hawkeye Arena, where they were hosting, by a double-digit seed in the Creighton Blue Jays. And they did not advance to the Sweet 16. That was a team that was a junior and sophomore laden squad because Monica Sonano, Kate Martin, McKenna Warnock, they all were juniors. Plus you had Caitlin as a sophomore, Gabby Marshall, that whole nucleus. They still had 2 to 3 more years, depending on who you were talking about, or 1 to 2 more years left on a college campus. And not that is an excuse for what Iowa did in this game. I want to be clear, because when you shoot 45% from the free throw line, that is inexcusable at the Division I level. But I do not believe, and this is with all due respect to the North Carolina fans who are definitely listening to this podcast, and we're not going to talk about Hubert, but we're briefly going to talk about Hubert. There is a difference between not executing when you have to intentionally miss a free throw and then rebound your miss in order to give yourself an opportunity to win the game. There's a difference between that and simply making your free throws. One is coaching. The UNC example, the first one, that's coaching. The second example, I mean, you've prepared your players for this point. Like, I don't like. My mom texted me. She said Jan's not the one shooting at the free throw line, and so that's where when I've seen this vitriol online, Mitch, about getting rid of Jan Jensen, who has had 3 of the better recruiting classes in the last 20 some odd years of Iowa basketball, men or women. She was at the forefront of Caitlin Clark's recruitment. She was at the forefront of the Megan Gustafson, Tania Davis recruiting class. I understand there's frustration because you did not get the guard play down the stretch that you have become accustomed to. I think it also makes us remember that Lucy Olson, while she was a one-year rental, she did finish third in scoring back in 2024 in the country behind, wait for it, two pretty good guards in Caitlin Clark and Juju Watkins. This is a team that banked too much after Taylor McCabe's injury on the Swiss Army knife that is Taylor Stremlo, on Addie Deal's ascension as a top 20 recruit and a true freshman. I do not believe they will be banking, even with McKenna. I'm always going to butcher your name. McKenna W. I'm going to learn how to pronounce your last name. McKenna Dubs. Even with McKenna Dubs, number 12 recruit in the country, coming in next year, post player. So Jan, post whisperer. Even with her coming in, I think Jan's going to learn a lesson here, which is don't just bank on, well, I know I have talent that's going to win out, because if it's young talent, we saw when pushed to the brink, just like Caitlin Clark and friends, what can happen in the round of 32.
Yeah, two things. I think that, if Taylor McCabe doesn't get hurt, I think we're having a different conversation about this Iowa team and how they finished the season, and they probably don't have that losing streak. And I think that she was just the glue. She kind of made everything work. Yeah. And so, that happened, and it kind of is what it is. I think in regard to this game, like for me, this wasn't really about like Jan Jensen getting out coached. I don't think that's what happened. I think this was just a situation where Virginia was playing with house money, and their players just wanted it more at the end of the day. Like you look at the box score, and like, yeah, the free throws is one thing. Like Iowa, you lost by 8, you missed 8 free throws. Virginia made 18. You look at, here's a telling one. So Virginia had 20 turnovers. Iowa had 16 turnovers. Iowa only scored 14 points off Virginia's 20 turnovers. Virginia scored 27 points off Iowa's 16. So, like, that was a situation where, like, yeah, we're turning the ball over, but we're stopping them. And when we turn them over, we're turning them into points. So, I that's an execution stat to me. And, yeah, I just think Virginia, like, playing with nothing to lose and just wanted it more. Last thing, needless to say, I think it's safe to say that Coach Mox is getting an extension from Carla Williams.
I want to also put out there on the record that we had Coach Mox on the hot seat. We had KAH at Georgia on the hot seat in our preseason pods. We had Krista Gerlich out in Lubbock at Texas Tech on the hot seat. All three of those lovely ladies are set to receive contract extensions this offseason. So maybe I should say Jan's on the hot seat so that Jan will go to a Final Four next year and get a well-deserved contract extension.
Yeah, we saw a couple coaches kind of coach their way off the hot seat this year. The old who's the West Virginia coach that bought himself another year? The football coach, Neil Brown.
Oh, Neil Brown.
He coached himself off the hot seat and then got fired the next year. So, maybe not a good omen for me to reference him in regards to some others.
We did have the Florida Gators on the hot seat. And, that one, at least we were right about one of them. We'll talk about that coming up in What's the Beef. We have to keep it moving with this week's starting 5. Again, the first 3 we're looking back at, in my opinion, 3 of the best games that we saw in the opening weekend of the women's NCAA tournament. Number 2, in my opinion, and we're going to get to Minnesota Ole Miss here in just a second, but the best game of the first round, undoubtedly, was Clemson and USC. Final score from little old Columbia, South Carolina, somehow, some way. It still pains me, Mitch. It still pains me. In OT, the Trojans 71, the Tigers 67. Sean Poppy, friend of the pod, we salute you. Clemson Tigers fans, we salute you. This is a game that, yes, you could have had. We thought you had at the buzzer. It looked like Mia Moore's little up and under lay-in that she didn't even intend to really throw up, kind of sneaks its way into the hoop. Unfortunately, it did not leave her hand in time, and so they go to overtime where Jazzy Davidson, for lack of a better term, Mitch, she is, I don't want to say the female Wemby, because we know that Dominique Malonga in the WNBA with the Seattle Storm is the female Wemby, but she's a monster. The way that she can contort her body, her defensive prowess, what she can do in the open floor. You do not see many body types like Jazzy Davidson's and what she can do on both ends. You just don't see it for a true freshman at the college level. And in my opinion, that's the reason that USC came back to win this game. And while they got boat raced by South Carolina in the round of 32, I do think that, number one, promising return for the Trojans, and number two, Clemson fans should not hang their heads after this hard-fought 8-9 loss.
Yeah, on USC real quick, I think it's clear now that, like, you know, for the first couple of years of Juju Watkins' career, we've been kind of asking, like, where is the Robin to her Batman? It was Kiki Iriafen, you know, one year. It's going to be Jazzy Davidson next year. And that is a big luxury to have, because Jazzy Davidson can do a lot of things for USC and do a lot of things really well. You're also going to have Kennedy Smith. I imagine that they're going to hit the portal as well and bring in a couple key pieces to kind of round out that roster. On Clemson, real quick, I would just say I don't think we've heard the last from the ACC about how this game ended in terms of the call at the end of regulation. I think that there are some people in Charlotte still not happy about how that went down. And so just keep an eye out on that. I will also say that, like, you know, as someone who has been, you know, when officiating shenanigans happen, usually at the NCAA tournament, there is someone in the media. A lot of times it's the AP reporter who's assigned to be the pool reporter, where you get to go and you get to get a statement from the officials, the referees, about, hey, what just happened? Why did you decide to do that? Why this? Why that? And when I was at the SEC tournament, I was asking them if they had one, because why is my phone is supposed to be on Do Not Disturb and it is ringing for some reason.
Are you about to Schefter me right now?
I'm pretty sure my mom was calling me to wish me happy birthday.
Oh, yeah, Mitch, you got to learn. That's rule. We're keeping this. We're not editing this out to be. This is rule number one. If it's your birthday and you're doing a podcast, you got to put that on Do Not Disturb.
Anyways, yeah, when I was at the SEC tournament, I was, you know, when Shea Ralph got tossed, I wanted, you know, I was like, hey, is there a pool reporter? The SEC tournament didn't have one. Anyways, if I would have been the person as the pool reporter to go get the statement from the officials after this Clemson USC game and gotten the response that I got, I would have not been happy. Because if you read, I think it's been published, if you read the response that the referees gave the pool reporter after the Clemson USC game, it's just jargon, and it just doesn't make any sense. It's just like, per rule XYB 32, this is why we did this. It's just like, none of it makes sense. There's no real explanation. So I will say that in regards to kind of big picture for Clemson, like I do think the future is really, really bright for that team. I think there's a potential for them to have like a top 4 finish in the ACC next year. They're bringing in a really good recruiting class. They're gonna hit the portal again. Sean Poppy is building. They're building towards something real there.
Which, hey, we've got 4 ACC teams in the Sweet 16 field. A lot of those teams will be returning the bulk of their roster in 2026, Clemson included. If you're a top 4 team in the ACC next year, you could very well be a 4 or a 5 seed when all is said and done in the NCAA tournament. One more game from the first weekend that we want to get to, another game that, in my opinion, qualifies as a top 3 game for the opening weekend. This one was a lot of fun, Mitch, because I was on the air on ESPN radio as it was coming down to the wire up at the barn in Minneapolis. Final score, Minnesota 65, Ole Miss 63. Amaya Battle, the hometown product, able to hit the turnaround J on the baseline as time expires. A true buzzer beater before the first true buzzer beater in the men's tournament out in San Diego between St. John's and Kansas. And so a beautiful, euphoric Sunday afternoon for basketball fans. But it all got started with Minnesota. You did not have Ole Miss advancing out of the opening weekend. Controversy surrounds this one, though, because, of course, our friend Coach Yo is involved, so there's controversy, as well as one of our favorite villains in the sport, Cody McMahon. And so we should have known that there would be drama coming out of this game in some form or fashion, whether they won or lost. Cody McMahon was not able to play most of this game due to foul trouble. She did finish as the Rebels' leading scorer, despite playing just 21 minutes. And so you tell me, Mitch, is this a game that if Cody McMahon's not in foul trouble, maybe there's a different result? Or, as you noted with Virginia, Did Minnesota just want it more? Before Mitch answers that question, we did have some technical difficulties, as you're seeing right now. Mitch is now operating on his phone. Let's keep it moving. Mitch, your response to Ole Miss, Minnesota. Did Minnesota just want it more?
No, I don't think it's a case of that. I thought it was a case of I do think that Minnesota got an assist from the refs here. I thought that fifth foul call on Cody McMahon was pretty soft. That's not really something that we see a lot of times in NCAA tournament games, an offensive foul like that when you're going to the basket with the ball. So, I do think that Coach Yo, while I do think that she complains a lot, I think she does have a legitimate beef here. And yeah, Minnesota advances their first Sweet 16 in a while. It would have been the third under Coach Yo for Ole Miss, but yeah, I thought that was kind of a bummer because Cody McMahon was one of the best players in the tournament, and I think to Coach Yo's point, a lot of times you don't get star players getting those kind of calls. And Cody McMahon was not given the benefit of the doubt in this game.
And while certainly the internet had fun with Coach Yo's comments about Paige Beckers and Caitlin Clark never drew those type of fouls, some people would encourage you to check out the Final Four from 2024, and maybe you'd have a different perception on, even mighty UConn. Sometimes they'll draw some fouls that are a little questionable and maybe fall to Iowa, who then advances to their second straight national title game. But I digress. Cody McMahon at least got a little bit of a get back in that her former team, the Ohio State Buckeyes, fell to Notre Dame in the round of 32, and they will also not be advancing to the Sweet 16. For Minnesota, it is their first second weekend appearance since 2005, and they draw the number 2 overall seed, the UCLA, or excuse me, they do not draw the UCLA Bruins, but Minnesota, yes, they do draw the Bruins. Who am I kidding? They do. They're just going to play Friday. I'm going to keep it moving. Let's get to number 4. Let's look ahead to that all-important Sweet 16. There's a lot of rematches here. There's a lot of old rivalries renewed in the field Friday and Saturday. Mitch, for you, what is the spiciest matchup that you are most excited for?
Ooh, the spiciest matchup. I did a bold predictions thing that ran this morning at USA Today. And I was kind of surprised that the Notre Dame Vanderbilt game got a 2:30 p.m. time slot and not like your 7 p.m. where Minnesota UCLA is, because I don't think that game's going to be close at all. And I think Vanderbilt Notre Dame is going to be a hell of a show. I mean, you have literally the most 2 exciting singular talents in the sport, I would say, left in the tournament, going one-on-one against each other, and they play the same position, and they're both from New Jersey. And like, it's Hannah Hidalgo versus Michaela Blakes is going to be a lot of fun. And I think, both of those teams, like, neither one of them has been to an Elite Eight in a long time. This is the 5th straight Sweet 16 under Niele Ivey for Notre Dame. And, yeah, maybe I was a little wrong about Notre Dame in terms of them getting to the Sweet 16. But however, I will say they got some bracket luck, because as soon as I saw them with Ohio State in that field, the team that had me worried was Fairfield. I was like, oh, Fairfield, like, they're going to hit some threes, whatever. Notre Dame easily got past them, and I was like, they're going to beat Ohio State. Like, that's just like that's going to happen. So yeah, Notre Dame Vanderbilt, I think, is the one I'm most looking forward to. But the late game that night is Duke LSU, and I think Kara has assembled a pretty good track record in run it back games, as evidenced most recently by the way they just hammered Baylor on Sunday, after losing to them by 4 points in Paris. So I think that Duke is going to be more up for this game, and they're going to be more prepared, and they're not going to be intimidated, and they're going to be motivated than they were in December.
You talk to the Blue Devils weekly, covering women's college basketball up there in the Triangle. I've now had the chance through ESPN Radio to talk to a couple of the gals on this roster. And from speaking with Ashlyn Jackson, from speaking with Delaney Thomas, they both independent of each other, because I talked to one last Sunday on ESPN and the other one this past Sunday, and they both used the term rock bottom to describe the 4-game losing streak that culminated with that loss at Cameron Indoor to LSU. And so that's where, for me, this is the spiciest matchup, especially because many of my other contemporaries at ESPN are all in on Kim Mulkey and LSU and this Flau'jae Johnson redemption arc. I didn't mention this because we were short on time with the Iowa-Virginia conversation. I have questions about Hannah Stolke in terms of being a true bus driver in pivotal games. I love Flau'jae Johnson as much as the next gal, but I have questions about Flau'jae Johnson when she is the number one scoring option in a big game. Her freshman year in the national title game against Iowa, she was option number 3. Down the home stretch of the last 2 postseasons ago, Angel Reese is still on the roster. Last year, Anissa Morrow is still on that roster. And so I am still fascinated to see if we are ever going to get in her college career, because I think she's going to be a great WNBA player because she's going to be the number 2 or the number 3 option on a team.
Right.
I am so ready for the moment that Flau'jae proves us wrong. I do not think it's going to be Friday night. I think Duke gets its get back because I do think they've had this one circled for quite some time.
I think so too. And to your point about Flau'jae, just look at how they've played against South Carolina this year in both of those matchups and how she has not really been able to will her team to a victory the way that you would want a superstar guard to do so, the way that we've seen Hannah Hidalgo and Michaela Blakes do that. We haven't really seen that from Flau'jae Johnson. And I do think that Duke has had this circled, and I don't think that they were scared at all when they saw the bracket and saw LSU in the Sweet 16. I just think they're a different team now, as I've talked a lot about. The game after the one in which they lost to LSU, that's when Riley Nelson came into the starting lineup. That's when the 17-game winning streak started. That's when things kind of started to trend in a different direction for the Blue Devils. So I like Duke in the matchup.
I want to dub the Friday slate of the Sweet 16 round as the Mia and Mitch were wrong, but I also don't think we're wrong. I just think that we've got some teams that are putting it together at the right time, or in the case of Hannah Hidalgo, is doing something that statistically, matchup wise, it's kind of a perfect storm. And again, I'm not making excuses, because for her to drop 23 points, 9 boards, 8 steals, 6 assists against Fairfield, 26, 13, 8 steals, 2 assists against Ohio State. Like, it's incredible. It's undeniable. She is the most exciting player in the sport. We've been telling you that since December. Yeah. I just didn't think it was sustainable for one player to drag a team to the Sweet 16, but perhaps I'm a hypocrite because I also root for Caitlin Clark. And what did she do her senior year? She dragged that Iowa team that was undersized outside of her in terms of sheer talent, and she dragged them all the way to the national title game. Maybe Hannah Hidalgo in this run for Notre Dame continues. Mitch, number 5 in this week's starting 5, as we do look ahead to the Sweet 16, the Elite 8 this upcoming weekend. I'm going to use the term Kemba candidate, and I know Kemba Walker, for some of our younger listeners, maybe that's not in the lexicon. Kemba Walker went on a run for an 8th-seeded UConn, led them to a national title that many did not see coming. I'm not asking for you to give me someone who has, like Virginia. You could say Kamaya Johnson if you want, but who is that? Maybe Kamaya Johnson's the answer. Who is that player? You can't say Lauren Betts. You can't say AZ Fudd. You can't say Michaela Blakes. Who is that player that you feel America is going to fall in love with if they haven't already this weekend?
Yeah, I think Kamora Johnson at Virginia is a big one. She's averaging like 24.5 points a game over their first 3 wins so far here. I think a lot of people in the country know who Hannah Hidalgo is. I think if you're looking for a candidate of like, this is a singular talent who can will their team to the Final Four if things go the right way, Hannah Hidalgo might be that player. Now, if they beat Michaela Blakes and Vanderbilt, they're probably going to have to play UConn. Unless bracket luck happens and North Carolina does something absolutely crazy and goes out and beats them. I don't think that's going to happen.
I think we would need Joe Giglio to be on the case then and start deciphering the bracket prophecy if that was to happen and it was to further break in Notre Dame's way.
Well, we would have to then balance out, Giglio's axiom of if something good can happen to Carolina, it will. But then the women's basketball rule of if something good can happen to UConn, it will. And which one of those will win out? We will see. But Kamora Johnson, I do think is a big one. I do think that people are going to get familiar with her and kind of fall in love with her a little bit. You know, I kind of wonder if maybe like this Duke team, becomes kind of likable. Not just Toby Fournier, but Taina Mare has played really well. She's now quietly like seventh all time in assists in the ACC. Has kind of had a quiet, underrated, I think, career at Duke, but she's now
Are we
won
including the
back-to-back
Boston College stats too?
Yeah, started at Boston College and now has won,
ACC.
has gone to, three straight Sweet 16s with Duke and has won back-to-back ACC titles. So those would be my Kemba candidates, those players that people might latch onto. If something happens in this Sweet 16 where Oklahoma beats South Carolina for a second time this season, you're going to see a lot of people fall in love with Aaliyah Chavez.
That game will not be taking place, though, in the city of Norman, giving our friend Tyler DeLuca a shout out there. Instead, it will be taking place in the regional in, wait for it,
Sacramento.
Sacramento. There it is.
Sacktown.
Sacktown. We're not in the city of Norman anymore, folks. We are in Sacktown. That is this week's starting five. Let's get to everyone's favorite segment.
Pure beef.
Oh, yeah. We love the beef, especially this time of year. It's Wagyu because it's coaching carousel season, and we finally have some clarity at some of the biggest openings in the sport in both the SEC and the ACC. Mitch, let's start with the big one right down the road from me. Tammy Reese leaving Rhode Island to take the head coaching post at the University of Florida. First things first, much like we may or may not be the reason that at least 3 head coaches are getting extensions this offseason because we put them on the hot seat. Are we the reason that the University of Florida ponied up the money to go get Tammy Reese, the former Virginia All-American and now longtime coach of the Rams up there in Rhode Island?
I don't know if we should take credit for that, but we can.
Because there is more money on the table than what we were both told, and that's
Yes.
very exciting for me as someone who lives in the state of Florida.
Somewhere along the way, after those first couple of days of the search, I think Florida realized, this is the first time they've done a women's basketball search in a little while, because you had Kelly Ray Finley taking over in the interim, and then basically getting that job 5 years ago after going to an NCAA tournament. She misses it the past 4 years, though, and so she got fired. So I think Florida kind of looked at the landscape a little bit a few days into the search and realized, okay, if we're going to be serious about women's basketball, we're going to have to pony up some cash. And that cash is not only needed to pay Tammy Reese, but it is needed to pay her buyout. And so I am very curious at some point, whoever gets it first via a FOIA request, to see Tammy Reese's term sheet, because her buyout at Rhode Island was $900,000. And, if you're a college football fan, that's nothing. That's a drop in the bucket. But in women's basketball, that's a pretty good price. That's a good chunk of change. I mean, a couple of years ago when Katie Meyer retired from Miami, Jose Fernandez had a buyout at USF that I think was in that ballpark. I believe it was $900,000, maybe just shy of $1 million. And that kept Miami from hiring him because they didn't want to pay another school $1 million to hire their head coach. And so you see Florida ponying up for this. That's a big message to me. And so, they were going after some of the best mid-major coaches in the country. The finalists, as it was explained to me, were basically Tammy Reese and George Mason's Vanessa Blair Lewis and Columbia's Megan Griffith. So they were taking some swings at coaches that have been to NCAA tournaments recently, coaches that have won a lot of games, that have pulled upsets off against Power 4 opponents. I do think it was explained to me a couple of days ago, Tammy is the coach that they want Vanessa might be the coach that they get, because Vanessa was more attainable in terms of the buyout. But Florida worked it out somehow, some way. And so Tammy Reese is their coach. And I think it's a big win. I think on the surface, like you've definitely like won the press conference, and like this, I think across the board, everybody is like, that's a really good hire. So, you've got the first part out of the way. Let's see what Tammy Reese does in the transfer portal. And then we'll run into next season and see what her coaching against her former college teammate and roommate in the SEC looks like.
Well, even beyond just being her former roommate, Dawn Staley gave a quote that was in the University of Florida's press release. So to your point about winning the press conference, again, I'm not trying to take a victory lap. I'm not trying to make this about us, but like the fact that not just us here on the Women's Basketball Podcast, but on multiple programs, people were critical of Florida's lack of investment in women's basketball. And then not only do you go out, and yes, you don't poach a sitting Power 5 head coach, but you do go out and you get arguably one of the best mid-major coaches on the market. And then you go out of your way to make sure that Dawn Staley's quote about her college roommate and former teammate is in the press release. That says to me that Florida's trying to at least flex and say, see, Mia and Mitch, we do care about women's basketball. We do care about women's sports. It is a beautiful symmetry moment because, as we previously discussed on this podcast, once upon a time, Scott Strickland made the decision to not go forward with Becky Hammon as his head coach, instead opting to hire Cam Newbauer. I don't need to go down that road to tell you all what occurred with that hire back in 2017, 2018. I promised you, Mitch, that there was a storyline. And our friend and sometimes co-host of this podcast, Rebecca Kopelman, and I were discussing last night, and she asked if I had asked you about it yet. So last summer, as many of you recall, I made a pilgrimage with our friend Rebecca to watch our friend Caitlin Clark play and the Indiana Fever. Then Caitlin did not play, but the Indiana Fever did go 1-1 on that little trip up in Indianapolis at Gainbridge Fieldhouse. And during that little 4th of July vacation, Rebecca's dad joined us. He does listen to this podcast as well, so shout out. And as we're in between sightseeing and touring around Indianapolis, Alan throws a TV on and he says, have either of you ever watched this basketball movie? And it's a Disney movie. And we're like, what? And he goes, yeah, Joanna Man. Have you ever watched Joanna Man? And we're both like, no, we've never seen Joanna Man. He insists on making us watch Joanna Man. That most of you who have not seen Joanna Man before, I don't know if they would be allowed to make that movie, or at the very least release it on Disney Plus in 2026. And so not only do I find it amazing that Tammy Reese was in Joanna Man, but it is the first movie in her illustrious acting career that is included in the press release by the University of Florida. And for me, that was just the cherry on top of an amazing last 300 some odd days of basketball. And but Joanna Man and Double Teamed are both put into the press release by the University of Florida after the quote from Dawn Staley. Shout out to Alan, Joanna Man forever.
Yeah, Tammy Reese has a IMDb page.
Does she ever also, or what do they call it? That's a Zagat. What's it called? The Screen Actors Guild. Does she have a card? I want to know. Tammy, let us know.
And in SAG, I don't know. She was also in an episode of Touched by an Angel, apparently.
She was in Sister Sister too.
And in Sister Sister, playing herself as Tammy Reese. In Joanna Man, she played the role of Vicky Sanchez. Joanna Man, a 4.8 stars out of 10 on IMDb.
Have you seen Joanna Man? That's what Rebecca wanted to know.
I have. It's been a long time, though. And I don't really have any intentions of going back and watching it again, but I'm sure Tammy Reese is great in it.
Hey, listen, Tammy, if you want to put your acting prowess on display on the pod, you're always welcome. Welcome to Florida. We're excited to have you in the Sunshine State. Proud of you, Gators, for caring about women's sports. One other big hire in the Power Fours this week. Can you tell us a little bit about the newest head coach of the Pitt Panthers, Mitch?
Yeah, Robin Harmony is your new coach at Pitt. She was most recently the coach at the College of Charleston. Pitt kept this pretty quiet. I was kind of trying to poke around. I had a lot of people asking me, hey, have you heard anything about Pitt? What's going on at Pitt? Had not really heard anything. Then things started to kind of bubble up at the end of last week where I was hearing that they had interviewed the Cleveland State head coach. They had interviewed Penn's head coach, Mike McLaughlin. They had also talked to, originally, their kind of top target in the search was Glenn Box, who's the head coach of Miami, Ohio. He is staying put. He got a big contract extension through 2032, I believe. And I had heard one person mention Robin Harmony to me last week, but I didn't really think anything of it. And then, Monday morning comes around and Robin Harmony is hired as Pitt's next head coach. And I think it's a really good hire. I got to kind of see Charleston up close this past weekend because they were at Duke. And she is somebody who has won at places where it's really hard to win. Like, she won 3 conference titles at Lamar. She took Charleston to the NCAA tournament for the first time ever. So she's somebody who, has done more with less. She has history in the ACC. She was like a Hall of Fame player at Miami in the 80s. And so I do think this is a really good hire by them. I also, as I was getting into the Pitt search, I just thought it was going to be weird if they hired a third straight male head coach. But those were the names that I kept hearing. And so this makes sense. This makes sense to me, especially with how things ended with Torrey Verity. I will just say, to throw out, Lance White is a great guy and a great human being. Just didn't work out for him as the head coach at Pitt. Torrey Verity, can't say the same. That said, I think Robin Harmony is a good hire.
I agree. And I should note there was one other hire in the Power Fives this week that we're going to get to, but I didn't include it as hey, this is news, because I think everyone and their mother knew it was the best kept secret or not in college basketball that Tanisha Wright was going home to Penn State.
Yeah, this was, from the very beginning of the search, Tanisha Wright's name was floated to me. And as I kind of did some, dialing back after the hire, got broken or became official, it seemed to me that she was really the only serious candidate that from the beginning, they were just focused on.
She clearly wanted it. And so they said, all right, you like us, we like you. You think this is your manifest destiny to come home to State College and save the Nittany Lions? Cool. Let's do it.
That's what they were focused on. They just, wanted to bring her home and she wanted to come home. And so that worked out. I'm skeptical of how well this is going to work out, just because Tanisha Wright has never been a college head coach. And while she did make the playoffs twice with the Dream, things didn't exactly go well there. I don't know. I don't know how this is going to go. I would advise her to maybe hire some really experienced college coaches to her staff.
Not too unlike what Kara Lawson did once upon a time.
Yes, for sure. I just to kind of spin around the carousel a little bit, I would expect Memphis to announce its hire this week. Do I
know that hire, personally?
They might be hiring somebody from your neck of the woods there. We'll see if that comes to fruition. The USF search is rolling. They are taking some big swings. They called Carly at Fairfield and she said no. But that's the type of that's the type of swings that they're taking.
Similar to what Florida was taking, by the way. So good on USF, good on Rob Higgins for saying, okay, those are the same people that Florida was swimming in the same pool. Cool. We're jumping right in.
VCU, I would expect that search to be wrapped up this week, especially after they just extended their men's coach. So they don't have to worry about that anymore. Nevada is one that could be wrapped up this week, and I would expect Northwestern to be wrapped up this week. And we'll see which direction Northwestern decides to go. If it's the direction I think they're going, I'm going to take a big victory lap.
Yes, and that one will be justified. And don't worry, folks, we will potentially, if time allows, hear from producer Dimitri a little bit later, because Alabama, they fought well with Louisville. we'll see if, Alabama is what Alabama is at the current moment in a week's time, the next time we join you here on the Women's Basketball Podcast. That is What's the Beef. Let's move on to Making Money with Mitch. We did not make official picks last week because instead at OG Bracket Light Night, we presented our brackets on the season. Mitch Northam is 28-17. Both of our Final Fours as of this writing are intact. Thank you, Greenbrier 5, for not being a team of destiny and knocking Kentucky out and destroying Mitch's bracket. With that said, Mitch does have 3 picks for us in the Sweet 16. Who do you got?
So these lines are via DraftKings. I looked at these last night. I'm taking Duke plus 8.5 against LSU. I think Duke will win. I definitely think they'll keep it with 8.5. Kentucky plus 15.5. Kentucky lost this first game by 11 points. It was a really weird game. Tony Morgan had 6 turnovers. Amelia Hassett and Jordan Obi didn't score. Tiani He was just coming back from her elbow injury. I just think Kentucky is just going to be much more prepared and equipped, and that sort of game is not going to happen twice for them. They're going to keep this thing close against Texas, I think. So Kentucky plus 15.5. And then I am going to take Vanderbilt to cover and beat Notre Dame. I just think the difference is I think Vanderbilt has better supporting pieces around their superstar than Notre Dame does. When you talk about Aubrey Galvin and Wenatanda, and I just think Vanderbilt's a little bit deeper than Notre Dame. I was about to say than the Hannah Hidalgos, which
they might as well. The Fighting Hannah Hidalgos. It's fine.
Yeah.
So just to put on the record, Mitch is not picking against you anymore, Duke. So write that down. He's right on there. He's right with you, Kara. He's doing hard better. He is remaining in the camp that Kentucky is the team to beat out of that region and that they could advance all the way to the Final Four, or at the very least covering his tracks, because maybe they just cover against Vic Schaefer and the Longhorns. And then finally, we are still picking against you, Hannah Hidalgo. So put it up on a bulletin board, Neil Ivy. We still don't believe in the Fighting Hannah Hidalgos on this podcast. We believe in Hannah. We just don't know if it's sustainable when you're going up against pretty elite competition in Shea Ralph's Commodores. Let's keep it moving. This is not a main event, but it's kind of a main event because in the last week since we have spoken to each other in a podcast form, in the last 2 weeks since we last spoke to you from the home studio, we got a CBA agreement, folks. Yay!
I will clear out and just let you run through this.
Yes, we're going to run through all the important dates and some of the highlights for the new collective bargaining agreement that the WNBA Players Association and the league have come to agreement on. Let's start with the specifics of the CBA. It is a 7-year deal with an opt-out after year 6. The league will play 44 games this year. It will expand to at least 50 games in 2027. That's the max number they can play. But then by 2029, it is a 52 maximum. And so they are trending over that 50-game plateau. Rosters must carry 12 players with 2 developmental player spots that do not count against the cap. That's obviously massive, because in the W for so long, 11 player spots. Now we're all of a sudden in a world where it's 12. Plus you have those 2 quote unquote developmental. I'm very curious if at some point in time, Mitch, that becomes the true. I'm looking out my window to make sure Donna Orender's not out there. Shout out to Donna. Does that become where the upshot?
Donna, come on in.
Donna, come on in. No, she's worried about her Gen W event this Friday. I'm helping her with. But does that become where if the Upshot League does what she expects the Upshot League to do you have players that are rostered in the Upshot League, just like how there are players who are on 2-way deals in the NBA, and so they are rostered on the G League team, but they also have a developmental spot in the W. So it'll be curious to see exactly what developmental player spots on those rosters actually means. The cap itself will be $7 million in 2026. That is up that is up from $1.5 million. So that's a $5.5 million increase, just, a slight little increase there. And it will top $10 million by the end of the agreement in 2033. The Supermax $1.4 million this upcoming season. That is up from $249,000 last year. It is projected to be $2.4 million by 2032. The average salary up from $120K last year to $583,000 beginning in 2026. And that average salary projected to be over $1 million by 2032. Of course, all of this is in large part thanks to that 20% rev share. Still unknown if that is actually gross or net revenue. Just 20% is what keeps being thrown out there. Finally, the $270,000 minimum salary, which will be based on years of service, is, of course, a large jump from the example I am about to give. It is projected to be $340,000, the minimum salary by 2032. Your example, of course, is that Caitlin Clark on the rookie minimum, despite being the number 1 overall pick in 2024, made $78,000 last year. This year alone in salary, she will make $530,000. She could get a projected $1.3 million salary in 2027 because she previously earned an all WNBA honor. She would be eligible to sign the Supermax, which would be $1.8 million in 2028. That's an expedited process for her to get to the Supermax because of the EPIC program, exceptional performance on initial contract, which is part of the CBA agreement. That'll fast track superstars like Caitlin, potentially like Paige Beckers, Juju Watkins once she enters the league, if she continues on this trajectory, where they could have an expedited route to the Supermax. And speaking of the Supermax, it's already being reported by the Las Vegas Review-Journal that A'ja Wilson will sign the $1.4 million Supermax as soon as she is allowed to do so.
Yeah, I would just add, it is gross revenue.
Okay, there it is.
Revenue sharing.
There it is.
Yes, I would expect A'ja Wilson and Brianna Stewart and Nafisa Collier, all three of them are free agents, and they will all sign Supermax deals. And then I would also expect like players like Sabrina Ionescu and Kelsey Plum and Jackie Young to come pretty close to also getting Supermaxes. The cap is raised, so like a team can afford multiple Supermax deals. So we'll see. All in all, the players made some concessions, but I think this is mostly a lot of really big wins for them.
And since you brought up all those players who could be signing a Supermax before the season begins, let's run through the calendar, shall we? Producer Dimitri, I do really think we need to go back the episode, what was it, like 3 episodes ago, where I told you what the calendar could be, Mitch, and you literally like melted live on camera. I think we need to turn that into a GIF because it's actually about to happen in reality, and we need to remind Mitch of what is ahead of him for the next month plus. Thankfully, he's got a whole team at USA Today. Go read their stuff.
Yeah.
April 1st through the 5th, which also coincides with the Final Four, which Mitch will be in attendance for in Phoenix, Arizona. That is when teams can finalize player protections of who will or will not be available. In April 6th, expansion draft. Yes, the day after the national championship, we will have the expansion draft for Toronto and Portland.
Do you know what else happens on April 6th?
What happens, Mitch?
The transfer portal opens.
Very fun.
So stupid.
Well, as if that wasn't enough fun, the next day on April 7th, that is technically when teams can make qualifying offers to restricted, reserved, or core eligible players. That is on the Tuesday and Wednesday of that week of April 6th, following the expansion draft. And then what we like to call in the NFL, tampering window, or at the very least, the negotiating window opens on April 9th. Teams can officially sign new acquisitions on April the 12th. And the very next day, we will have the traditional WNBA draft, which of course will come 8 days after the national championship game. And then one other note, 1 week later, training camp will begin in earnest on April 19th.
Looking forward to it. It's going to be
when you said off the top of the pod that we sleep in May, you weren't kidding, Mitch.
It's true.
Not kidding. We've still got a bunch of little quick hits we want to get to in last call, so let's get after it. I know he doesn't want to pop in because of some of the technical difficulties we had, and we want to make sure that we can still hear Mitch, who's operating on his phone right now. Shout out to producer Dimitri's alma mater, Alabama, gave more of a fight to Jeff Walz in Louisville than I think many were anticipating in the first round of 32 game on wasn't it? Yeah, I thought it was first, right? Alabama-Louisville was the first game of the day on Monday, right? Yeah, 69-68. The Cardinals prevail. They're headed back to the Sweet 16.
Yeah. Solid year for the Crimson Tide. We will see what the future holds.
Audi Crooks and Iowa State faltered down the stretch again when she was asked by Tommy Birch of the Des Moines Register as well as ESPN following the Cyclones' disappointing loss to Syracuse in the 8-9 game in the Stores Regional if she would be back next year. Audi said that now was not the time to talk about that. Mitch, what does that say to you?
I think that tells me that Audi Crooks is at least entertaining the idea of not finishing her collegiate career at Iowa State. And I mean, to be honest with you, I can't blame her. Like, this is going to be, we're coming on into her senior year, and she still hasn't played in the second weekend of the NCAA tournament. And I don't really think that's on her. Like, she scored 37 points against Syracuse. And Iowa State couldn't get it done. I just like, at what point, like, do you need to keep popping off 40 pieces, but your team can't win big, important games? So, it would not shock me if Audi Crooks ends up somewhere else. If we want to kind of play the speculation game, just hypotheticals, like Oklahoma's going to need a center next year.
Mhm.
Reagan Beers is graduating. That would be a pretty lethal combo, her and Aaliyah Chavez. I believe Brenda Fries is from the state of Iowa. I also believe Brenda Fries has a long pedigree of developing post players for the WNBA. So those are two that I would think about.
Speaking of Brenda Fries, she's next in last call. She's inspiring think pieces, both good and bad, with her actions over the last 48 to 72 hours. First came the inspiring sideline conversation with one of her transfers that she brought in from Duke in Oluchi Okinawa, in which she tried to encourage her that she believed in her and she's here for her. She's going to coach her tough. Unfortunately, Maryland falls to North Carolina in the round of 32. Maybe Brenda has not made some friends after some of the other tweets that she has sent since then, at least on one side of the aisle. But at the same time, I do agree. Brenda Fries, Audi Crooks, collision course. Could we be headed towards it?
Yeah, I saw this in real time. I was sitting there with Shelby Swanson, and Shelby, we're like, oh man, like Brenda's, getting into Oluchi. But like that, like Brenda has always been this coach, and like, not been afraid to shy away from that. Like, even as I think like basketball culture has kind of shifted and stuff. And the key, I think, to her success has been in recent years as the sport has changed is finding players who want to be coached that way. Like Cheyenne Sellers talked about, basically loved being yelled at by Brenda in the huddle. And Oluchi seems to take to that as well. She played a lot better after that moment. I just thought that was good coaching. Like, sometimes players need to be coached hard, and it's the coach's job to kind of figure out, do I have a good enough relationship with this player to know that this is what they need in this moment? For Lucci, it was. And, she did play better even though Maryland lost. That moment went kind of viral. But yeah, that's the coach that Brenda's always been.
And a reminder, Brenda has the most ACC tournament titles, her in Maryland, of any school.
Yeah, Maryland, tied with Duke for 10.
Yeah, just file that one away, folks. File that one away. They've been playing in the Big Ten for almost a decade now, but still the most ACC tournament titles of anyone. Let's keep it moving. Let's stay in the triangle because, we talked about this at the live show, Mitch, and then some of the comments from NC State head coach Wes Moore over the last 48 hours have me wondering if perhaps the Easter egg that you dropped at our OG Light Bracket night about a potential retirement from the longtime head coach of the Wolfpack could be near following their 92-63 loss in Ann Arbor to the Michigan Wolverines.
If I were to get my crystal ball out, I would say that Wes Moore does not retire this year. That's just the feeling that I have currently at this moment at 9:53 a.m. on Tuesday, March 24th. But it wouldn't shock me if things went the other way and he did decide to call it quits. I kind of think Wes doesn't want to go out on this note. Getting beat by Michigan that badly. I think he would want to go out, having hosted games in Reynolds Coliseum in the NCAA tournament, like they usually do, like has been the standard under him at NC State. And based on what I've heard, NC State is supposed to be getting the women's basketball team some more support from the administration and from boosters in terms of resources to build the roster and to shop in the transfer portal this offseason. So I think Wes is going to run it back for one more, but it wouldn't shock me if things went the other way.
What's funny is as I searched for the quote from Wes Moore about their loss to Michigan and where they go from here, the first tweet that popped up was one from you from last summer, out of context. Quote, "I'm a stallion. I may have another 10 years in me. Frozen margaritas for everybody." As Mitch as Mitch laughs, we just if we weren't pressed for time, I'd love to do a think piece on that. Keeping it moving. Final score. This one was a surprise to literally no one unless you have been living under a rock for the better part of the last 6 weeks. Final score in one of the ugliest 7-10 games that you will see. NC State, Westmore and the Wolfpack, 76, Tennessee, 61. The transfers already pouring into the portal, which is not officially open until April 6th from Kim Caldwell's program. It's not great. But again, I am maybe glass half full because I believe in what we saw from Kim Caldwell year one as where she actually will go as a head coach of the Lady Vols. And I look at it as kind of when Brenda Fries had to turn over 10 of her 12 scholarship spots 2 years ago. And this was all intentional. All of the media statements that were made and the benching of this player, benching of that player, because Kim Caldwell wants to flip the roster. She's going to do so. Let's see how she does.
I tweeted this out, so I'll just keep this quick. Kim Caldwell has to decide whether or not she is going to recruit specific players to her scheme and system, or if she is going to adapt her system to the players that Tennessee is capable of recruiting as a marquee program. So Kim Caldwell has to decide which aisle of the grocery store she's going to shop in. And decide if she has the necessary ingredients to complete her recipe. I think there was a disconnect this year in scheme and roster construction, and I think we are headed towards more transfers, and I think we are headed towards staff turnover for Tennessee.
UConn not only beat the brakes off Syracuse, not only did we have some questionable comments following the Oranges' loss to the Huskies, we'll get to those here in a second, but a 31-0 run graphic flashing on ESPN. I don't know if that's ever happened before, even with UConn's dominance in the sport over the last 3 decades. And so, yeah, I'm going to lead by saying that, but your thoughts on some of the comments from Syracuse following the loss?
Yeah, Felicia Leggett-Jack, I think you're a really good coach. The complaining about getting sent to UConn, like, I just don't have sympathy for you. I'm sorry. If you don't want to get sent to UConn, you got to be better than an 8 or a 9 seed because they're always going to be a 1 seed. And so you're in the ACC and you have, everything at your disposal to build a better resume and to win more games and to get out of being an 8 or a 9 seed. So win more games in the regular season and you won't get to UConn.
People forget Syracuse went to the national championship game a decade ago as a 4 seed, where they also got the brakes beaten off of them by UConn, but they were a 4 seed. Do hard better, Felicia. First double-digit seed since I almost said San Diego State, South Dakota State, and Creighton in 2022. Never say I didn't say anything nice about you, woohoos. One more shout out to our friends up in Charlottesville, as Virginia will advance as a 10 seed to the Sweet 16, and of course, why did Creighton get to the Sweet 16 in 2022? Oh, that's right. They beat Iowa too. So hopefully lightning strikes twice for my Iowa Hawkeyes. And finally, I wanted to give a shout out, not just in the women's tournament, Mitch, but also in the men's tournament, the student media who have been spotlighted. And look, I know we've also memed some of them into oblivion over the years. And I've seen a lot of discourse, especially coming out of Gainesville, that were praising the broadcast crew on the men's tournament side out of High Point. But we crucified some of the student media out of the University of Florida last year who were pictured cheering on press row. There is a difference between being hometown radio, which is what those 2 gentlemen from High Point are, whether they're students or not. That is unfortunately the nature of hometown radio. You do have bias versus if you are a student journalist who is impartially covering your school that you also attend, there needs to be some etiquette differentiation between those two. But also I want to shout out especially UTSA, the student media that made their way, as well as the independent media from the San Antonio area that made their way to UTSA's first round game on their own dime.
Real quick, because we have a hard out, I just want to give a shout out to the Bulldogs, UGA. We had a lot of students from their journalism department helping out USA Today with their sports coverage. I met a couple of them in Chapel Hill. They did a great job this weekend. Go read their stuff at usatoday.com.
Sweet 16, Elite 8 on tap. We will be back next Monday, Tuesday. You'll get the podcast on Wednesday as we look ahead to the Final Four, Mitch's trip to Phoenix, and an absolutely loaded month of April. We truly sleep in May. And we truly appreciate you listening to the Women's Basketball Podcast. He's Mitch. I'm Mia saying we will catch you next week.
Deuces.